Jackie, thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really strange being on the other side of the mic.
You can relax and sit back, and you don't have to worry about doing all the questioning today. But for those of you who don't know, so Jackie is she runs the Long COVID podcast, and I wanted to start off actually by saying thank you because there's so much good quality content that you and the podcast have produced over the past few years. And I know myself, I've gained a huge amount of benefit from it, from the expert interviews to recovery stories and everything. So I just wanted to start off with a thank you actually, because it's been so invaluable for myself and for sure for so many other people as well.
Oh, thanks so much. It's really been a labor of love. It's been hard going, but yeah, it's just connecting with so many people has been amazing. So yeah, thank you.
Amazing. So today we obviously want to cover a lot of ground. We want to talk about your experience with long COVID. I'd love to delve into a little bit about your recovery, touch on some stuff around mental health and, what you're up to now as well, because I love to hear about the journey that people have been on, and then obviously what they're doing now on the other side, because we hear about people doing all sorts. You were telling me earlier about your camper van and hiking, but I'd love it if you could start with taking us back to the beginning. So talk us a little bit about your initial experiences with COVID, what you were doing before, and then what happened once you started to become ill.
Yeah, and it feels like a very long time ago now. And I've found over the last, gosh, what is it now? Kind of 4 and a bit years since all of this started. That time has felt really strange. And it sort of feels like both like a lifetime and also like no time at all, which is a kind of paradox. But yeah, I got sick right at the beginning. Well, certainly right at the beginning in terms of the UK. In the UK, I can't actually remember what date it was, but I basically got sick a week before lockdown. So, at that point in Scotland, there were very few reported cases. So I thought I had a stomach bug. I thought, oh, well, that's a bit of a coincidence, but, I don't think it's COVID because I didn't have the symptoms that were kind of reported as being the COVID symptoms at the time. And it just didn't seem very likely. In hindsight, of course, that's what it was. And it was very likely because there were so many more cases than we thought. But, hindsight. So yeah, I sort of thought, oh, I'll take a day off work and I'll go back in tomorrow because this isn't anything. It was exam season at school. I was working as a music teacher. So I had a lot of pressure on me, partly from myself and partly from from the job, for being there for those kids who were doing those exams. If I didn't show up, then they wouldn't be able to do their exams. So it was kind of like you gotta be there. So I took a day off, and then no, I'm gonna have to take another day. No, and then anyway, by about day 4, things got an awful lot worse, and that was kind of where everything kind of started going really wrong. My partner ended up calling the paramedics because he just thought that things were that bad, and it was them that said, yeah, this is COVID, take it easy and you'll be okay, sort of thing. And I sort of thought, oh my goodness, how have I managed to end up with this? And it's amazing. And, looking back on it, of course it was obvious. I was working in schools. I was on public transport.
Yeah.
Of course I would have picked it up. But at the time it didn't seem like that. So yeah, things got quite bad. And I think it was about 6 weeks. I was just really out of it, really. I was very fatigued, that kind of fatigue I'd never experienced before, where you can't lift your head up and you just can't. I had a lot of really scary stuff, like the sort of breathlessness and the really high heart rate, chest pain, and the kind of combination of those big 3 was really scary, which really ramped up things like anxiety and stuff as well, because, you're supposed to be worried when you have chest pain and breathlessness and high heart rate.
Hard not to be.
That's kind of exactly. So that obviously made all of that worse. But I think that was sort of the main stuff that was going on. I would have a couple of days where I thought, oh, okay, well, that was pretty dreadful, but I'm feeling a bit better today. I'll get up, I'll move around. I even went outside and tried to walk around the block once, and that knocked me way, 2 weeks back into bed. But after around 6 weeks or so, things really did start to improve. And I got some advice, which I think may not have been the greatest advice. And also, I didn't really take it in a particularly good way either, which was, oh, you just need to get moving again. And I think maybe if I'd done it in a very gentle way, then maybe it would have been okay. But what I did was, because I was a sort of energy, active, exercise person, I was like, right, well, I'll go and walk 5K.
Yeah.
And, actually, to be fair, for a couple of months, it worked. I was getting a bit more active. I was doing a bit better. I was able to go a bit further before getting too tired. And I just thought, well, this is just taking a bit of time to build back up, because basically I've been pretty much inactive for 6 weeks, which I have never been before. So things seem to be going in the right direction. Around about the 3 month mark, I just sort of hit a wall at that point, and that was where all the other sort of symptoms kind of came back. So definitely fatigue, but the kind of the heart rate, breathlessness, the chest pain, I think, which were the main ones, but all sorts of other kind of random things. I'd be getting intermittent nausea and COVID toes. I don't know if you've come across these, where
No,
your toes kind of
I,
become
I
kind of
have
like
heard about it, but
blistery and
not.
red and black, and yeah, they were horrible. And as a symptom, they were nowhere near as debilitating as any of the other symptoms, really. But it was almost like you could see them. We talk about long COVID and
Yeah.
ME/CFS being this very invisible illness, because a lot of the symptoms are symptoms that you can't quantify so well. Um, and I think that's one of many problems with it. But these toes that I had, I could see them. I could see that they were red and disgusting, and I don't know why that lives with me in some way, in a way that maybe some of the others don't, just because it maybe was so visual. I don't know. But yeah, anyway, from about the 3 month mark, this just kind of, it was the roller coaster of long COVID. It was up and down, and I would try to do too much because I was still kind of working on this advice that, I was sort of okay. I just needed to keep kind of going, and I didn't know what else to do. So I kept doing it, even at times where I thought, I'm not sure this is working. I thought, well, maybe I just need to try harder,
You just
because
need to push
that's
through.
that's what life had always been like. Yeah, I'd always been
Yeah.
this sort of person who, if it doesn't work, you try again. And if it's not working, you need to try harder. You need to push more. Um, and that had sort of always worked for me. And, in hindsight, it hadn't worked for me, because it put myself in a position where, this then happened. But, it in my mind, that was kind of what you did. So yeah, that kind of started that all off, and it was quite a long journey.
And how long did these? Firstly, actually, I'd like to touch on, because you talk about fatigue, and I think again
Mm,
we sort of rehash this again and again, but I want to make this distinction between the kind of fatigue and tiredness that one would experience when you're run down, maybe you haven't been sleeping enough, maybe you've been doing a lot of exercise, versus the fatigue that you get when you're experiencing one of these sort of conditions, which, like you said, is very much invisible but
yeah,
unbelievably crushing. So I wonder if you could like touch on that, and then also how
yeah.
long did this kind of period last for, or how long until you start to notice any kind of degree of improvement, and then we can obviously move into what actually started to affect those symptoms in a good way.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the tiredness, I think one of, again, one of many problems with this, sort of umbrella type of condition, let's say, is that, you say you're feeling fatigued, or you say that you're tired. And, one of the most hurtful things that you can say to a person who's got long COVID or ME is, oh, yeah, I get a bit tired too. Yeah, I know how you're feeling. And, you know, people probably mean well when they say things like that. They're trying to relate to you. They're trying to, I don't know, they're trying to make you feel better, or I don't know, they probably mean well in that situation. And I've had people say that to me as well. And it's, so it makes everything so much worse because people who haven't experienced something like this have not experienced that level of fatigue. They cannot understand, and it almost makes it worse when they try, even if you can tell yourself that that they're meaning it from a good place. And yeah, I think it was like nothing I had ever experienced before. I mean, I've done really epic hill walks. I've done half marathons. I've really pushed myself like to the limit. And, yes, you feel exhausted after doing things like that, but it's a totally different thing to this, long COVID fatigue, where it is really hard to explain how, you just can't. When you're in that kind of crash, when you're in that post-exertional malaise, when you're experiencing that fatigue, there are times where you cannot lift your head off the pillow. You just can't do it. You hear people say, "Oh, well, just exercise, just push through." And I did too much of trying to do that, which is why I kept crashing into this
Hmm.
fatigue. But when you're in that, it's like there's no just. You don't just do anything. It's so hard to describe. It's just you feel like you weigh 1,000 tons. You feel like, oh, I don't know. I almost felt sometimes like I was in some sort of a, you know, totally disconnected to my body. It's
Yeah,
it's like my muscles weren't connected because I couldn't lift my arm, kind of thing.
yeah.
Um, it is very difficult to describe, I think, to somebody who hasn't experienced it, which, yeah, creates this sort of bigger disconnect because, when you're ill, you already feel that disconnect between yourself and normal people. I hate the word
Yeah,
normal, but
yeah, yeah,
you
yeah,
know what I
yeah.
mean.
I know what you mean. I think
Um,
in defence, it is as you touched on though. It's so difficult to describe and so
it
bizarre
is.
to even comprehend that it must be very difficult for other people to imagine that. And if I think about and reflect upon
It's
myself beforehand, when
totally.
if somebody had told me about that and I tried to comprehend that, I don't think I would have been able to. I think I would have been like, well, you're tired. I know what it's like to be really tired because I've done training camps and I've done all nighters and I've done
Totally.
all of this sort of stuff. So I know what it's like to be really fatigued and really tired. So I think it's like how do you I've said this before, like how do you explain to somebody, how do you say also like when I like go for a walk, like afterwards I get like a hangover and the flu like together and then kind of like can't move and stuff. You're like what are you talking about? Like what do you mean you can't relate that in any way to any kind of normal sort of event?
Yeah.
But yeah, sorry, go on.
I think, people have analogies for this. There was someone I interviewed had a really beautiful one. I think it might even be his wife that came up with it. And he had a beer analogy because he said, well,
Yeah.
everyone's had a few too many beers and they know what that feels like. So he had this thing where he said, right, well, you know, generally with long COVID for him, life was kind of 3 beers. You've had 3 beers, you feel, you know, a little bit, not quite as sharp as you might want to be, but you're sort of maybe just about okay. If he were to do like an activity, he could shoot up to 6 beers. If he overdid
Hmm.
it a little bit too much more, he might shoot up to like 10 beers. And
Hmm.
to bring those beers back down again would take finding some sort of strategy, and sometimes it might take days. And I thought, you know, that's quite good because people can sort of understand that feeling of having had a bit too much to drink and how that
Yeah.
can make you feel like you can't quite do things. You don't have that control over your body in the same way that you would if you hadn't had any beers. And it's
Hmm.
not to say that having long COVID is being drunk at all. but it was that kind of, putting it in some way that people can sort of relate to in a way, in something that they have experienced. And I
Yeah.
thought that's quite clever because, yeah, people can sort of relate to that on some level. So
Yeah.
it's finding those kind of bridges, isn't it? Finding ways to connect in a way that people can sort of understand. Because, yeah, you can't necessarily blame people for not understanding something they haven't experienced. Sure, you can blame them for not being empathetic because, there's no excuse to be a dick about it. But
Hmm.
at the same time, if they haven't had that experience, you know, it is, I can't understand childbirth because I've never been through it. But that doesn't mean that I can't sort of think, good grief, that sounds quite unpleasant. Thing. It's a really
Yeah, I think
graphic example.
we can all kind of relate to that being unpleasant.
Um,
No, I think it's a very good point though. So you had these symptoms, you had this malaise, you had this
yes.
palpitations, these issues. How long did this go on for? And then I'd love to dive into what started to be a bit of a turning point for you, and I'd love to touch on a few of the key things that start to get you better.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, from around about the point where I sort of hit that wall, which was about 3 months in, it was the best part of a year before I found anything that helped. Within that, I was doing that kind of thing where I thought, well, I've been given this advice to just keep moving, keep doing things. Anyone, if I sort of said, well, how much, no one would really give me any answers. And I hadn't actually seen a doctor face to face other than the paramedics that my partner called at the beginning. I think it was almost a year before I actually saw a doctor face to face. And I know some people have had horrible experiences with doctors. Some people have had very good experiences. I was lucky in that I never had a doctor who didn't believe me or who, tried to dismiss me or anything like that. They were all sort of sympathetic. They all listened to me, but they didn't know what to do. They did all
Yeah.
the blood tests. They did more blood tests. They, sort of looked into all the kind of like, normal things to look into and ruled out things. But they didn't really know what to do beyond that. And um, I suppose by, you don't really know what to ask for either because, everything in my body was going wrong, but I didn't really have any sense of, any links between all of this. It seemed unlikely to me that overnight, virtually, I had developed, 30 different medical conditions. It seemed a little bit unlikely, but
Yeah.
at the same time, I didn't really understand. I'm a musician. I didn't understand, medical stuff. I mean, I'm quite interested in things, but also, when you have that fatigue, it's quite difficult to kind of really dive into doing tons and tons and tons of research because your brain starts to hurt really quickly, especially if it's in a field that you're not familiar with. So
That rabbit hole.
I think
Go down that rabbit
absolutely.
hole is tough.
Yeah, which I obviously did. But yeah, so I kept going with this kind of push crash thing, where I would do too much and then I would really hit the deck for a bit and then I would pick myself up and go again because I didn't know what else to do. I'm a very stubborn person and, a lot of people might have gone, this isn't working. Let's look for something else. But I think, looking, and I kick myself when I look back on that experience. Like, what was I doing? Why did I keep pushing through? But there really wasn't much else out there. People, the link between long COVID and ME and all of that, people were talking about it a little bit, but there really wasn't the level of information back then that there is now, and even now it's quite hard to find that information.
Yeah.
So looking back on it, it's like, okay, well, let's not blame myself for doing the wrong thing, but I did the wrong thing for a long time, and after it took me about a year before I sort of started really realizing this isn't working. I think I need
Hmm.
to start looking to see what else. Um, and I think as well, within that, people would say, oh, give it 3 months and you'll be okay. And I thought,
Yeah.
okay, well, I just kind of have to wait this out. Um, you know, and, yes, I was pushing myself too hard, but at the same time, I was the sort of person that was used to pushing myself to, half marathons, you know, 3-day treks in the hills, really sort of high intensity, lots and lots and lots of stuff. So in my mind, the stuff that I was doing was so small that it felt
Hmm.
like virtually nothing. So it was like I had massively, massively, massively decreased my activity. I mean, that wasn't enough. It
Hmm.
certainly wasn't enough on its own, but at the time, that was kind of what I was thinking. And I sort of still feel like I have to sort of defend that, which is ridiculous because I was doing the best thing that I thought at the time. But I sort of think, why was I doing that? That was so stupid. No, I was doing what I thought was right. It
Yeah, you
wasn't,
didn't. You
but
couldn't know. You couldn't have
at the
known
time,
more.
I thought it was.
Hmm.
Exactly. Um, so yeah, around about a year on, and think it was an Instagram post. I think that a friend tagged me in. She must have seen that I posted on Facebook that I had what was now known as long COVID, because right back at the start, long COVID didn't exist. It was several months before that became a thing. And anyway, it was this guy who said, I'll teach you to breathe and it'll cure your long COVID. I mean, that wasn't quite what it said, but it was like, I can help you with your long COVID symptoms. And I thought, this sounds like hippie bullshit. But at the same time, I was so desperate. I hadn't found anything else. And everything that I'd been trying was making me worse.
Yeah.
But I thought, I'm going to get in touch with this guy and, you know, have at me, come on,
Hmm.
do what you can kind of thing. And he was amazing, actually. He was the first person who sort of seemed to have any understanding. He's not a long COVID specialist at all. He's a yoga teacher with a background in medicine as well. So he didn't know anything about long COVID particularly, but what he did understand was a lot more about how the body works as a whole in a way that a doctor possibly wouldn't think. And he also understood the power of the breath and how breathing dysfunctionally, which is what I was doing and what, so many other people are doing as well, is that, if you can breathe better, then your body is going to work more efficiently anyway.
Hmm.
And when you've got things like fatigue, then you want your body to work as efficiently as possible. You want to do the most you can with what little you have, kind of thing. So this really opened my eyes to the fact that there was something that I could do. Because up to that point, it was like, I literally don't know what to do, so I'm going to keep doing the one thing that clearly isn't working. Um,
Yep.
so at that point, it was like, okay, here is something I can do. I can start working on this. And, you know, there was a lot of things that he suggested that actually didn't help because it was kind of coming in at too high a level. Um,
Yeah.
Again, I suppose it comes back to the fact that he didn't quite understand long COVID, but at the same time, he was amazing. He listened, he tried to adapt things to sort of help things, and it was the first thing that I found that made a difference. Suddenly, instead of everything I doing making things worse, I could sit down and do some breathing exercises and it would make me feel better. Um, so that was amazing. And it then kind of opened the door to some of the other things that helped as well. Because I
Hmm.
think, we talk a lot about pacing. And that's important. Of course, it is important. But I think most of the time when people are taught about pacing or when they sort of come across pacing, we talk about physical pacing, activity pacing, all of that sort of stuff, physical activity pacing, what I mean. And yes, but for me, that wasn't, as I said, it wasn't the problem. That obviously was the problem from what I've been saying. But physical activity pacing is very easy to understand. It's not easy to do, but it's very easy to understand. You either do or you don't. If you need to break up your washing up and you're walking up the stairs to go to the bathroom or, whatever those things are, physical activity, if you're not moving, then, you're doing your physical pacing. The thing that I really, really struggled with was the kind of cognitive, mental, emotional side of that. Because my brain, I love my brain. my brain is amazing, but it is constantly on. It is full of
Hmm.
ideas. It's overthinking. It's creative. It's it's fireworks. It's the little monkey in the brain with the symbols. Like that's my head. It's always on, and it's amazing because it just comes up with so many ideas and makes you know life really exciting. But it also is really difficult to break that up, to switch it off. And I think what I kind of understood through doing some of these breathing exercises and getting kind of, kind of starting to understand things like yoga nidra was that was how I could turn my brain off. Because it was all very well reducing my physical activity and pacing that. But actually, if my brain was still on all the time, then my brain wasn't resting. And that was using up all of this energy. And even the idea that like scrolling on your phone, that's not cognitive rest
No, no,
because your
no.
brain is still on. Actually, cognitive rest is where you're not thinking, where you are listening to your yoga nidra, where you're, I don't know, whatever it is that you use to switch your brain off. For me, it was yoga nidra and things like that that
And
really, really helped me.
in many ways, the cognitive side, certainly for many people, like for myself included, the cognitive side is far more demanding in terms of the effect that it
Can be,
has on my body. So, for example,
can
I
be.
like relatively I'm okay and for a lot of the time have been okay with going out and doing like some kind of walks or doing some kind of I like the mug, by the way. I like the merch. I just noticed that.
Oh,
so
they're
so go,
cool.
very, very good. So going out and doing some walks and doing some kind of movement and exercise actually,
Mm,
when broken up and not done in a super intense way is actually quite good for me. But one of the things that is a killer is staring at a screen for too long or being on my phone for too long. And then often you'll have these days where I have a rest day. So I don't do any exercise. I stay on the sofa, I stay in bed all day. And yeah, at the end of the day, I'm still totally exhausted and more spent than I would have been if I'd gone out and done even like a 10k
yeah,
10k walk. And it's because of that mental stimulation, that the sheer
definitely.
amount of energy that your brain has to consume when it's being used for uh, in scrolling or whatever it is, especially if you're prone to hyperstimulation, which I am, and it sounds like you are, and I think it's
Yeah,
a common thing, isn't it, amongst those with long COVID as well.
totally. And I think as well, I mean, certainly something that I noticed, and I don't know if it was that I was just more aware of things or if it is something that, that was all, I don't know, but it was almost like the less I did physically, the more my brain went in circles. I think before I would have, if I was feeling stressed and I was overthinking and I was, doing all of those things that I now really understand I do quite a lot, I would be like, okay, turn the computer off. Let's go for a good long run. And I'd have gone and,
Hmm.
pounded it out around the park and done a 10K or something. I'd have, you know, kind of not been thinking while I was doing that. And then I would have come back into my house and been like, okay, cool,
Yeah.
done. Whereas, with long COVID, you can't do that. You maybe even can't walk to the post box. You maybe sometimes can't even get out into the garden if you're lucky enough to have one. So it's like the less physically I was doing, the more that my brain was mentally spinning in circles, and I couldn't find a way to get out of that, because the only coping mechanisms I had weren't open to me anymore, or if I tried them, they ended fairly catastrophically. So it was really difficult to do. And I think the other one, the emotional one, is so unpredictable. You can pace your physical activity to some extent. I was lucky I don't have kids or anything that I had to look after. But, I feel for people who have people they have to look after because,
Hmm.
you can pace your activity to some extent. But if you have a sick kid, what are you supposed to do? You can't say, well, I can't
Hmm.
look after my child tonight because I have to pace my activity. So that must be so difficult. I was lucky I didn't have that. But so the sort of physical pacing I could sort of, I wasn't very good at it. I don't think anyone is. But it was it was sort of I could manage that myself. The cognitive stuff I was starting to understand. Again, I wasn't very good at it and it was really difficult to switch that brain off sometimes. But the emotional one, so unpredictable. You can't
Hmm.
predict when, you're going to have an argument with your partner. You can try
Yeah.
to avoid it, but sometimes trying to avoid it makes it worse. Or, when your parents are going to phone you up and they might mean well, but they might say something that really triggers you because, maybe it's not even their fault. Maybe it's just something that I'm really sensitive to, or maybe it is their fault. I don't know. But, it's like that emotional trigger. You can't pace that because you don't know when it's going to come, and then that can then send you into a crash. I remember having an argument with my partner and it taking me out for a week, and I'm thinking,
Hmm.
this is ridiculous. Like, I argue all the time. I can be really argumentative, but that was before long COVID. When you have that, everything, things that you didn't even think took a toll on you at all suddenly do. And
Hmm.
someone described it once as learning a new body, your new
Hmm.
body. And yeah, it is. And I find the same in reverse, I suppose, coming back out the other end. But, talk about that one in a minute. Um,
I think that's so, because you have no control over these external things, like you said, that can then
yeah,
trigger the emotional side, or your sensitivity to kind of the cognitive and the physical. All you can try and do, which again I think we can talk about in a little bit, is learn mechanisms and ways and techniques of decreasing your own sensitivity to those triggers. And I think that's something I'd like to touch on
yeah.
in a sec when we talk about mental health. Firstly, I'd just like to rewind just a little bit back to the breathing, just to just so people can
Mm,
understand a little bit about what exactly you were doing there. And the first thing I wanted to pick up on was talking about the sense of agency, which I think is a huge thing. And I know for me,
yeah.
finding, whether it be breathing, cold water, bringing work, any like whatever, meditation, whatever it may be, having that degree of agency as opposed to, okay, you've just got to wait 3 6 months, 8 months, whatever it might be, is for somebody who is, a go-getter and wants to do things and has always spent their life doing stuff. It's incredibly frustrating just to sit around and just wait. So having that degree of agency, as you were saying, is so beneficial and so empowering. And in terms of the actual breath work and the dysfunction that you became aware of, can you explain a little bit about what exactly you were doing wrong, per se, in terms of your breathing, and how you kind of went about adjusting that, or at least becoming aware of it, so that you could put things into place going forward?
Yeah, and I think, awareness is the first step of any journey, really. You've got to have that awareness of yourself, of what's going on, before you're able to then start thinking, okay, well, what could I do about that? Before you start then looking. So actually just understanding that, to start with, that there was a wrong way to breathe. I always assumed that breathing was an absolute. You either did or you
Mm-hmm.
didn't. Breathing is a yes or no question, and it's not at all. And I've since I now work as a breathing instructor with people with long COVID and ME. Because this had such a profound impact on me that I thought, gosh, I got to do this. This is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So with our breathing, and maybe anyone who's watching or listening to this could maybe check in with themselves while they're doing it, because what I discovered was that actually I was probably breathing dysfunctionally even before I got sick, or certainly I was breathing sort of dysfunctionally some of the time before I got sick. It's very, very common. So to breathe well, number one, we need to be breathing through our nose at all times. So when we are at rest, obviously it's much easier. A lot of people still don't, but at rest it's much, much easier. When we're moving around, when we're doing activities, when we're stressed, that's the one that tends to
Mm-hmm.
get me. When I get stressed, I tend to, start kind of, or excited even, when you get excited and you start speaking fast, and you start,
Mm-hmm.
taking in those little breaths through your mouth because you want to speak faster and you want to speak faster. And, I probably have set a terrible example while we've been speaking here because I probably have got excited. Um, and then obviously, maybe not relevant to people with long COVID at the moment, but will be in the future. when you're exercising, always through the nose. So through the nose, absolutely the foundation. And I wasn't. I was lying in my bed, breathing through my mouth really fast. And that's incredibly bad. So number one, through the nose. If we are breathing through our nose, we're more likely to be using our diaphragm. We're not definitely, but we're more likely to be. If you're breathing through your mouth, you're very, very unlikely to be breathing into your diaphragm. And our diaphragm is our most important breathing muscle. So it's really important to be using that. But there is actually research now, and I interviewed the two people who did the paper and the podcast a couple of months ago, and they've done some research into breathing and long COVID and some sort of interventions that can help. And they found exactly what I experienced myself and what I've been finding with the people I've been working with, which is that people are breathing dysfunctionally, people aren't using their diaphragm, and the diaphragm is a muscle. If you don't use it, you lose it. So if you're not breathing into your diaphragm is going to get weaker, which is then going to make it harder to then strengthen up again, because of course with long COVID we can't go about muscle training in the same way that, you know, normal I hate the word normal, but normal people would. We
Yeah.
can't just start picking up those weights, or the diaphragm equivalent of picking up those weights. We've got to go very, very carefully. So yeah, the diaphragm. And then, there's all sorts of stuff about the sort of acid in the blood and pH levels, which is acid, isn't it? Carbon dioxide and all of that sort of stuff that they've been finding, which again is kind of mirrored in my own experiences and what I've been finding with people I've been working with. So, okay, there's a problem here. What do we do about it? Well, to start with, we shut our mouths and we breathe through our nose. But this, and again, this comes back to everything that I've discovered through my journey with long COVID. Everything's a process. You don't find a problem and fix a problem in a winner. You work out something that you can kind of target. And for me, the first thing was breathing. And then you have to start working on it. But you can't necessarily, certainly for me, I couldn't start breathing through my nose instantly. It was a process. So I would sort of start trying for a bit, and then I'd have to take a break. Because if I tried to breathe through my nose the whole time, I would put myself into a panic attack, which would, not end so well. So it really was that process. And I think this is what I would stress to anybody who is, looking into breathing exercises is, firstly, work with someone who understands. I think that's such a big thing, who understands how sensitive we can be, how a slight overexertion can have horrible, horrible consequences, and how to really kind of tailor these kind of techniques and stuff to your new body. Or your for now body, that does need to be treated much more gently, because the breath is amazing. And I genuinely believe that breathing exercises can help everybody to some extent. But it's got to be done in the right way. There are so many people that have said, oh, I tried breathing and it made me worse. Well, I think the sad thing for that is actually you probably tried to do it in a way that was a bit too hardcore. So it's being very, very, very gentle with it. And, as you do that, then, you probably can start to increase a little bit. But you got to do that in a way that works for you. So I think that's the only thing I would say is just, is that we know, don't we, from this experience, that it's better to have been able to do more than wish we'd done less. So
For
many
sure.
times this happened to me. Because I would always think, back to me being a stubborn go-getter, if I felt like I could have done more, then I should have.
Yeah.
Whereas actually,
You
like,
had
it's turning
stuff
that on its
left
head
in the
with long
tank,
COVID,
sort of
isn't it?
thing. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's better to have that left in the tank than to have done that little bit too much and put yourself back. Because they're so demoralizing in so many ways, quite apart from the sort of physical pain that you're in. Mentally it's very, very tough. when you knock yourself back, especially when you thought you found something that helped. It's like, this was
Yeah, yeah,
helping. Why didn't it work
yeah.
today?
This is the
It can be
golden
so
bullet, and
horrible.
now it's not working. No, that is very
Totally.
interesting, and I think I mean, I've read a book called Breathe. I think James Nestor, and he talks
James
about this
Lester.
and how the effect of breathing can have not just on your physiological being, but also like physically on the shape of people's mouths and everything.
Yeah.
If they're breathing through their mouths, it has a really
Yeah.
profound effect. And yeah, even just then, I was just trying to focus on my breathing. I think everyone probably watching this would have been just sitting there trying to do some more diaphragmatic breathing whilst watching. But that's a very very good place to start, and I'll add the links to your resources
Thanks.
in the comments as
Thank you.
well. Um, so in terms of the third thing then that helped you to get not over the line. I don't like to use that expression because it's very much a kind of a process. I think with recovery, but
Mm.
obviously we talked about breathing, the pacing both physically and cognitively, and then what was one of the other final kind of things that seemed to help you get back to a degree of normality when it comes to recovering from long COVID?
Yeah, and the third big one for me was cold water. And like, again, me being a person who will quite happily kind of blame myself for all sorts of things. I'm like, why didn't I try that earlier? I mean, partly because it sounded horrendous. But more than that, I think, you literally just said things are in process. And I think that is absolutely true. And, I've heard other people say, oh, I tried cold water and it made me worse. And I think that's why it happened when it happened for me. I'd spent a lot of time working on my breathing, starting to understand my nervous system, um, working on the kind of doing less physically, mentally, emotionally, all of these kind of things, the yoga nidra, things were a lot more stable. I wasn't anywhere near better, but things were more stable. I understood better what I was doing. And I also was very, very careful the way I did it. I'd kind of done a bit of reading around it, and I knew that, warming yourself back up again took a lot of energy. So it sort of made clear in my mind, well, I shouldn't stay in too long then. I mean, the first time I went in, it was literally like I was sort of inching my way in, like, millimeter by millimeter, thinking, oh my goodness, what am I doing? Like, but at the same time, I mean, you'd try anything, wouldn't you?
Mm-hmm.
I think it was Raylan Nagel that coined the term "I would eat worms," or eyeballs. I think it was eyeballs. You get to the stage where you would eat eyeballs if someone said it would make you better, and
With
I would
joy,
prefer to
with
get into
delight.
cold water. Exactly. Yeah, I would enjoy it. I would do it with a smile on my face. And personally, I would prefer getting into cold water than eating eyeballs, but each to their own. And
Yeah.
but yeah, I sort of got in, and it was so cold. I mean, this was Loch Ness in, I think it was at the end of April, so the air temperature had warmed up a little bit. The water had warmed a little bit, but it was freaking cold. And I got in, I must have, been in for, I don't know, 30 seconds or something. And then I got out and I was like, oh, right. So, hurriedly got my clothes back on and everything. And I felt better. Like, it felt like I had that energy that I hadn't had
Mm-hmm.
in ages. Well, it didn't last, an hour later, I was, back to normal, normal kind of long COVID. I feel rubbish, but I thought there's, in the same way that I found with the breathing, with everything else, there's something in this because
Mm-hmm.
I felt better. It didn't last, but I felt better.
Yeah.
So I kept doing it, and I kept going over and over, a couple of times a week, I think it was 2 or 3 times a week even. And I would feel better when I went in. And over time, the effects lasted longer and longer. So, there wouldn't be such a gap in between times where I felt rubbish. Um, And, I think my energy levels were sort of going up. I worked out as well that if I wanted to do an activity, that I could maybe do a bit of a walk or a bit of something if I had my cold water dip first. So I'd go for a swim and then I would, do something. And I was sort of able to do a bit more and a bit more and a bit more. And I was sort of, I was able to stay in the water a little bit longer as well. But I think the mistake a lot of people make with this is, and I totally appreciate this because I thought exactly the same. If I'm going to do it, I might as well make it worth it and stay in for a long time, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Now, I'm very lucky. Loch Ness is very close, so I don't have to travel for a couple of hours to get to my cold water. It's 10 minutes in the car. But yeah, I think what a lot of people will do is that they'll try and stay in for a bit too long, and then it will take them so much more energy to warm back up afterwards. The maximum benefits are at about 90 seconds in the water. So by staying in longer than 90
Okay.
seconds, you're not going to feel more better. Um, you know, you can stay in less and it'll probably still make you feel better. But staying in longer than the 90 seconds is not going to make it better. It's actually going to give you more warming up to have to do afterwards. And
And
if
more
you're
energy
a
consumption as well.
regular person, exactly, yeah,
Yeah.
if you're a
Yeah.
regular person, it doesn't matter so much because you can stand on the back and you can do star jump and you can dance and you can run up and down the beach and whatever. But if you're somebody with long COVID whose energy, isn't so good, actually just literally warming yourself up is going to cost you a lot of energy. We were talking about pacing, you've got to pace your warming up as well. So staying in longer than the 90 seconds, actually, you don't need to. And maybe you don't even want to stay in that long. So I think it's kind of, I've never had any kind of post-exertional malaise crash or anything from the cold water. But I think that's largely because I was very careful about the way I did it. As partly that I did it at the right time for me. I didn't do it too soon, but also because I always very, very careful to listen to my body. If I was having a day where I wasn't feeling so good, then I would stay in for much less time. I would go in for 30 seconds, float around, and then get out. Whereas if I was having a day where I was starting to feel really good, the sun was out, the water was calm, then maybe I would swim for a bit. And over time, I would stay in a bit longer. I would do a bit more swimming and stuff. But if I wasn't feeling that good, then I wouldn't. And I think I was very, very careful about that. And I think the other thing, with the breathing, if you haven't got your breathing under control, then actually it's dangerous getting into cold
Yeah.
water. Because when you go into cold water, the first reaction you're going to have is, that kind of gasp kind of thing. Your breathing is going to speed up because it's a stressor, and I think this is another reason why it worked very well for me, because I was a bit more stable. I'd done a lot of work on my nervous system and it was a little bit more stable. Whereas if I'd done it sooner, that kind of stressor, we know what happens with stressors, kaboom. So, going in carefully and slowly to reduce that stressor and controlling the breath as you go in. If your breath speeds up, if you end up hyperventilating in water, that's extremely dangerous because you can pass out. And, passing out at any point is dangerous, but in water, obviously for obvious reasons, it can be really, really bad. So, having that control over the breath was something I had to have before I went into the water. But also, doing it slowly at the sort of speed that your breath can handle as well. So, yeah, it was amazing. I think for me as well, I'm an outdoors person. One of the things that I missed the most was being able to get out into nature, out into the mountains, out into all those special places. And I sort of found ways of doing that to some extent. I had a new appreciation for my garden, being able to get down to Loch Ness and, get in the water and just sit on the beach, in this amazing place. But and I think maybe that's another reason why it worked so well for me, mentally being able to be outside and do something that
Yeah.
it felt like a bit of an adventure in some ways. And, I couldn't do the hill walking adventures that I'd done before and that I wanted so, desperately to do. But I could do this. And I think, it just really kind of resonated with me as a sort of outdoor adventure person. That actually, swimming in Loch Ness, that is quite adventurous on some
That is quite
levels.
an adventure.
Yeah, and I
I
still do it. I'm still down there quite often, and it just, I don't know. I think it feels like a very special place for me. That sort of beach at Loch Ness, even in the summer when it's sort of full of tourists, because they want
yeah
to experience my special place too.
yeah
But yeah,
yeah.
it's a very special place for me, I think.
It's it's underrated as well, the effect that being in nature and just being outside
Hugely.
and being surrounded by whether the trees or lakes, it really has quite a profound impact, and there's a reason why
100%.
you feel better, or like normal people even feel better when you get out in the fresh air. Like it has this
Yeah.
profound impact on you. And it's a very interesting point about the, because yeah, for me, I know I notice the exact same effect when I have a cold shower, when I have a plunge. I For like a short period of time I feel normal, like it's like my kind of nervous system is like switched off, everything is sort of clear again, my head feels nice. And for me, I always sort of thought the more the better. So I'd kind of like continue to stay in and set a timer for 10 minutes, and I'm staying in for 10 minutes. I'm not getting out
Mm,
until the end. Again, this kind of pushing mentality. So it's quite interesting to hear about graduating it, and also the impact that reheating yourself will have, because I've definitely noticed that before when I've done like plunge. And at the beach, for example, I did it like a New Year's Day one, and I stayed in for about 5 6 minutes. But then reheating myself, I felt exhausted. I hadn't done
yeah.
anything. Um, a quick one then, with regards to how you were. So you're doing all of these things. You're obviously the a very holistic approach, the breath work, the pacing, the cold water. Did you then find that your boundaries just gradually expanded until the point where you felt like, okay, I'm kind of essentially able to do what I like now? And during that time, how were you approaching both your cognitive work and also the physical work as well? Because to be honest, as a question for me, because this is something that I struggle with, because I go through these kind of periods where I'm like, oh, I feel pretty much better. And even like now, I can go and do a gym session, I can go and do stuff, but then I still get a bit of the fog, a bit of the malaise, and so on. How were you kind of approaching it in a kind of balanced and tactful way?
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting question because I'm not sure. I sort of, I don't, there wasn't like an approach. It was very trial and error. And, I think I always have had this mentality that I would rather have done it and regretted it than had the what if. I wonder what would have happened if I had tried that. And, I think that was why I had this sort of push and crash, why I crashed so much was because I just couldn't help testing those boundaries, working out, how much can I do? Oh, okay, too much. But, but also I don't know, that I think there comes a point where you have to say, okay, things are sort of stable. I'm doing better. What would happen if? Because I think I had never. I mean, there were moments where I felt hopeless. There were many moments where I felt hopeless, and I think that was part of what kind of inspired me to do the podcast. Because I thought if I'm feeling this hopeless, then maybe other people are too. But I think I always had this kind of. Because I had to get better. I
Mm-hmm.
absolutely had to. It wasn't. I mean, there was definitely sort of belief in there, but I think it wasn't, certainly at some points, it wasn't so much belief than just sort of dogged determination, refusal to give up, stubbornness that, I will get there. It's not going to be pretty, and I don't know how long it's going to take, but I will. And I think that was kind of what made me keep kind of, you know, pushing and crashing. But yeah, I think, I spent a lot of time doing the wrong things, pushing myself far too hard, and making myself worse. And then I spent a lot of time finding the right things. There were the three main things that I talked about, but there was a lot of other things that I tried that sort of contributed as well. I think my therapist, I don't give her enough credit. She was wonderful,
Mm-hmm.
really helping me with kind of like working my way through the fog. you know, the literal brain fog at sometimes, but more just kind of the sort of fog of everything's falling apart. I don't know what to do, and sort of, you know, she was amazing. There were other things I tried as well. Journaling I found very helpful when I had intense emotions come up. You know, it wasn't something I did day to day, but you know, when I was feeling really frustrated or really upset, or you know, then I found it quite helpful to get them out. So I had this whole kind of package of things that I was sort of that helped. And I realized that I was basically sort of putting myself into boot camp. You know, nervous system boot camp, where I was doing my breathing, I was doing my very gentle yoga, I was doing my yoga nidra, I was doing my journaling, I was doing my this, I was doing, you know, I literally had sort of like a schedule. And I thought, I'm feeling a lot better. But also, I'd never been more miserable in my entire life because I wasn't doing anything that gave me any joy. So I thought, okay, well, I need to kind of find some way of doing some things. And I think I just sort of started experimenting a little bit and sort of, you know, having this understanding of the nervous system as well that I by this point did. I thought, well, if I'm feeling more nervous system happy, then it's a terrible word, isn't it? If I'm feeling more regulated, that would be a better word, then my body is going to respond better to activity. So on those days where I was feeling more regulated, I would start doing things, you know, little things, trying things out a little bit, and very much listening to my body because I had never done that before. So if I started doing an activity and I started feeling, oh dear, I'm feeling the warning signs, which the first warning sign for me was always my breath. Then that was a sign to stop. And I generally would try to, you know, it wasn't always possible depending on what the activity was. If I'd walked the post box, I would have to walk back, as a stupid example. But, you know, just sort of, yeah, starting to experiment. And then, okay, right, so there are some days where I can do some stuff and I'm okay. I don't get the crash. I'm all right. Okay. So this was in hindsight, it was kind of building a bit of confidence in myself and my mind
Yeah.
as well. And I think that confidence in your body actually is important too. Um, but then, you know, those days where I didn't feel so good, well, okay, on those days I would max out on some of the gentle stuff. So I would do more breathing, I would do more yoga nidra, I would, you know, do, if I was going to do any movement at all, it was something much more gentle. Maybe I would go and get in the water for a few seconds or something like that. And then it was sort of thinking, okay, but when I start doing these things, oh, okay, so they start to regulate my body. So actually, maybe there are more days where I can do things. I just need to do other things first. So
Like a
that's where I
buffer
kind of coined
almost.
this idea. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
bookending that activity. So if I'm not feeling so good and I have things that I either have to do or want to do, then okay, we have to bookend that with 10 minutes of breathing beforehand. How am I feeling? Okay, I'm good to go. Or maybe I need to do another 10 minutes. Or maybe I need to do a yoga nidra. Or maybe I just need to give myself a couple of hours because, you know, we know with dysautonomia that the body doesn't work so well in the morning. It takes a bit of time to get going. So then if I was wanting to schedule stuff, I would generally try to do it for later in the morning or in the afternoon. So it was trying to work out what works and when. And then there are some days when nothing works. And sometimes you just have to write that day off and go, okay, today is definitely a couch day. And
Yeah.
that's okay. And I found myself accepting that a bit easier when I started to have the days where I could do a bit more on some of those days. So it was kind of gently pushing those boundaries and, you know, starting to understand what my body could do and what that felt like and how to know like which days I could do things and which days I couldn't. And I would get better at kind of gauging that. But I was still, you know, I'd still end up crashing some of the time because, you know, I think that's, you know, we learn through experience, don't we? And, you know, those experiences aren't always pleasant. Um, but I think, you know, a lot of, you know, every time I got it wrong, I learned a lot. And that kind of helped me the next time around. So yeah, I think it was a sort of a gradual thing. And I think I kind of got this from a lot of people. We can get so frustrated because we don't feel like things are getting any better. You're putting in all this work, you're doing these breathing exercises, you're doing this resting, you're doing this, that, you're doing, whatever it is that you're doing. I'm not getting any better. Like, why am I
Hmm.
bothering to put all of this effort in to all of these strategies when I'm not getting any better? What is the point? Like, I think we've probably all had sort of that sort of experience. And I think it was really kind of thinking, we know this kind of like, wibbly wobbly trajectory of long COVID where it's up and down and up and down and up and down, and we don't feel like we're getting anywhere. And I started to remember that looking day to day, pointless. Even looking week to week, kind of pointless.
Hmm.
I needed to look back maybe 3 months and go, oh, okay, I handled that a lot better than I would have done 3 months ago. Or I couldn't have done that 3 months, that sort of thing. So starting to kind of just look a little bit longer, and yeah, really appreciate kind of the little improvements, because I think what I
Hmm.
started noticing as well is when I started to be able to do a bit more and to have that improvement, I thought, yay, isn't this great that things are improving and that I can do these things that I couldn't do before, and I'm really happy that I can do them. But it was almost as well when I did see improvement that it kind of made me go, oh my goodness, that there's so much further to go.
Yeah, yeah. It
And then
becomes more
mentally, that's
frustrating
really
almost.
tough. It is exactly, and
I
I think it's so difficult because long COVID is obviously a physical illness. These symptoms that we're having is physical. Our nervous system is physical, but at the same time, there is obviously a massive connection between our mental and our physical health. And it's important to look after both. And when we're feeling really down mentally, it's going to have an impact on how we feel physically, and vice versa as well. So it's not so black and white, I don't think. The body as a whole kind of thing. So it's like whatever kind of bit of it you know whatever it's going to have these kind of wide reaching consequences, isn't it? And I think yeah, kind of is starting to understand that some of these kind of emotional reactions I had to things, it's like they were totally understandable, but also, okay, let's look at that, because why am I getting so much more frustrated as I get more better? That seems like a really silly reaction, but actually, it's probably quite understandable. Even if feeling better was the thing that I most wanted in all the world, it actually brought out this kind of really intense emotional reaction that I wasn't expecting at all. And
For
I think,
sure.
that was one of the reasons why my therapist was just so wonderful, because I could kind of take some of this stuff to her and start to kind of unpick it, which I found really helpful.
I think it's so true, and that's the final thing before we wrap up. I'd like to touch on is
Mm.
this aspect of mental health, because as you said, I've noticed something similar. Back when you're totally bedbound and totally unable to do anything, you think, oh my god, if I could just walk about and have a slightly clear head for a few hours, it would be incredible. And I've also noticed that as you get to that point, almost some of the kind of emotional and the kind of underlying issues as well have kind of have come to and risen to the surface. So you get to that point, and there's other things. And I think the mental health point is a really good one, because so many people, I think, are so alienated by the dismissal and the misdiagnosing with just having anxiety or depression or whatever it may be. For example, myself, yeah, early on it was just I went. They said you're anxious. You need to go and exercise more, etc. I'm like, I'm not. It's not that. It's not a normal anxiety. I'm telling you, it's not. And so many people felt that same kind of frustration, and that for me has meant though that any mention of certainly for me, any mention of like a mental health support or CBT or therapy or things like that is I get an instant alarm around it, instant like kind of red flag, because I kind of think, well, are you just saying that what it is anxiety, or that won't actually have any impact on the fundamental issue, because there is something wrong and I need to sort that, and then everything else downstream will help. But I think it's actually unwise, because regardless of what's going on, there is a symptom there, that whether it be the anxiety, the depression, or underlying mental health issues, that can be supported through doing, like you say, with therapy, or at least understanding and comprehending what those symptoms are, why they're coming about, because there are tools that you can use to address the kind of emotional reactivity or the depression or the anxiety and so on. And I think that's something that you said you found with your therapist.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I do get it, why people are worried about talking about mental health. I think mental health has been taboo for a long time, before, take long COVID out of the equation. And if someone says they need a mental health day at work, then, you know, instantly, you start to get some of those kind of reactions. It's like, oh, they're weak, or they're, whatever, and when you then add in something like long COVID that, has this kind of sort of, a lot of people have been told, oh, it's just anxiety, or, or certainly they've been made to feel like it's all in their head and it's all mental health and things. I can understand why people are worried about going to their doctor and saying, I think I have some anxiety, because, some doctors will turn around, or some friends, family, employers will turn around and say, I told you it was just anxiety. And then that piles on top of all of this other stuff that they're feeling, both mentally and physically, and I think, the word just, I think we should take the word just out of the long COVID world, because there's no just about any of this. And I think this is something that I've noticed from, my own experiences. I've fully recovered. I'm great. I'm better than I was before now. But that doesn't mean that my journey was simple. It was painful, it was devastating. It was the worst thing I've ever experienced in my life. And, there's no just about that. I didn't just discover breathing, and then that just led me to something else, which then just led me to something else. It's just not that simple. So I think, someone, even if long COVID were just anxiety, calling it just is so dismissive. And I think anyone who has experienced any mental health, whether
Yeah.
it's anxiety, depression, or anything else, will say, anxiety, there's no just about anxiety. Anxiety can be crippling,
Yeah,
in the
ruin your
same way that
life.
any other mental health condition can be, be absolutely devastating to your life. And I mean, looking back on it, I think I had some anxiety before. I masked it very well. But I think actually I did have anxiety before I was sick. It really reared its head while I was unwell, because for obvious reasons, when you're long-term sick, of course you're going to be anxious, because you've no idea what's going on with your body. You don't know if you're going to get better. You don't know if you're going to be able to financially provide for yourself, for anyone else that's depending on you. You don't know what happens when you don't know. You're going to be anxious, and when you can't do the things that you want to do, you're probably going to be depressed. It's like there's so many, it's a side effect of, doesn't mean it didn't proceed as well. But yeah, I think, really understanding how actually my anxiety was massive. It was making my physical symptoms worse. It's
Yeah.
kind of like the two were riffing off each other. The physical was
100%.
making the mental worse, and then the mental was feeding back into the physical, and I was in this sort of spiral. And it was almost like just being able to put a name on that and saying, actually, there's a lot of anxiety there. Made me able to just kind of start seeing some of it for what it was. And, there's a person I interviewed, I think it was Dr. Jim Jackson, who's what is he? He's an amazing human being. He does, he's a neuro something, and he
Yeah.
does a lot in sort of brain stuff. Not a doctor.
That is the technical term, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. He's a brain guy.
A
And
brain thing.
he said something that really resonated with me, which was that, an untreated mental health condition can be just as serious as an untreated physical condition. And, the two are obviously intrinsically linked. And, maybe just because we can't do something about the physical right now doesn't mean that we shouldn't do something about the mental. And that maybe doing something about the mental may help the physical a little. But even if it doesn't, it's still worth doing something about the mental. And, I think, that was something that really helped me, was understanding how much anxiety I had, understanding that, yeah, I was feeling really low, understanding that actually I was carrying a huge amount of trauma from this whole experience. I mean, some from before the experience, actually, as it turned out. But certainly my kind of initial experience with COVID, with getting unwell, was quite traumatic. And then being ill for 3 and a bit years, that's traumatic before you even add in the whole pandemic and, everything that's going on in the world at the moment. So, I think everybody's kind of carrying a bit of trauma from that, however that shows up in each individual person. So, and there's so much that can be addressed there, but it needs to be done right. It needs to be done gently. It needs to be done with empathy and understanding
Hmm.
of what these people have experienced. And, maybe that means working with someone who, specializes in or has some experience of what you're going through. Um, I was lucky that I found some really great people to work with and that I sort of joined some of the dots myself and, worked out a load of these things. But, I think, yeah, I think there's so much that we can do. It's just, it's got to be done right and right for you. And what's right for you
Hmm.
isn't necessarily right for another person. And I think that's what makes this so difficult. There's no kind of like, there's no map that works
No.
for everybody. It's not like, right, you start here, you follow that path and then that path, and then you go over there, and then you end up at the final point there and you're good. It's like your start point and your end point are in different places for everybody, for starters, and everyone's
Hmm.
route is going to be different. People are going to follow different paths. Some people are maybe not even going to follow a path. So it's like, a lot of, I think this is why recovery stories are so important, because, you listen to loads of different recovery stories, you hear loads of different people's journeys, and you start to piece together the bits that resonate for you. So people might listen to this and say, oh, breathing. Yeah, that really resonates with me. I want to go work with her. That sounds like that's for me. But cold water, good grief, no. I'm going to go and
Hmm.
try acupuncture instead, or whatever, and it's piecing together those different bits and pieces to the point where, you will find your way through, but it's not going to be the same route, I
No,
guess. Um,
for
and I
sure.
think the most important thing actually to take from a recovery story even is it's not even necessarily the things that the person did, although some of them may resonate with you. It's more that like that person recovered. Okay, that person recovered, that person recovered, that person recovered. Okay. It's kind of keeping that hope and that belief, because that's really helpful, and it's going to keep you looking for the things that are going to help you as well, I think. So
We were
it's,
talking.
it's helpful on so many levels.
We were talking about that earlier, weren't we? Saying that there's plenty of articles, research papers, stats, and stuff that are incredibly alarming. There's plenty of horror stories
Mm.
about people with these conditions and stuff. So seeing that some people have had some improvements or got better is incredibly valuable. And just to finish on that mental health thing, I think that's so important, because I think we have this kind of total separation between mind and body. We're totally aware and accept that when you feel anxious about something, it upsets your stomach, your heart rate like rises. In the case of panic attacks, for example, you literally will have, you'll hyperventilate, you won't be able to see anything, you'll get foggy, your whole like world will narrow in. We're totally on board and totally
Exactly.
accepting that it works that way. And then even the body to the brain as well on the other side, when we say we don't exercise, you end up getting a bit depressed. We're totally comfortable saying that. Yeah, with chronic conditions and other things, it seems like there's a bit of reluctance. Whereas the kind of approach that I've taken is, regardless of what is going on in my body, there is ways that you can improve and change your relationship with those sensations. You can change how you react to them, and in doing so, you can improve the quality of your life, and hopefully, also in doing so, you can lower the kind of reactivity of your sort of body and system as a whole, which would hopefully allow you to be in a more kind of restful and relaxing state, as opposed to this constant uptight and in this very hyper vigilant place as well. But
Yeah.
yeah, I just wanted to finally finish on talking about what you're doing now, Jackie, because I think it's really nice for people to hear. I'd love for you to talk about very briefly about the work that you're doing, and also some of your camping trips as well. I think everybody would like to hear about some of the camper van hear about the camper van and hear about the hikes that you've been doing as well. To finish up.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess what is life like now? And it's been just over a year since I sort of declared myself fully recovered, and it's been a really weird year. I said earlier, when you become unwell, you have to learn your new body. And you have to start understanding things like pacing, understanding your nervous system. How do I regulate my nervous system? Oh, I've crashed. All of these things. And for me, coming out the other end, it was kind of similar, but in reverse. I was having to learn another new body, because I am so different now to the person, like I'm unrecognizable in a lot of ways to the person that I was 4.5 years ago before I got unwell. And like, I definitely see that as an upgrade. Like, I'm a much better person. I'm happier, I'm healthier, I'm just better in all ways. It was a horrible experience to have to go through to get here. And I don't, some people say they're grateful for their illness. I don't think I'm grateful for my illness because it was awful, but I am really grateful for what's come out the other end. I think I am just so much better in so many ways. And yeah, over the last year, I've just been kind of trying to work out what that is, because it was like, okay, well, I know I'm different, but I'm not quite sure what that looks like. So kind of just trying to work that out. And yes, I'm working as a breathing instructor and running courses, helping people to kind of work through their breath, that awareness, breathing functionally, how we can use the breath to influence the nervous system, how we know which exercises to do when, what exercises are appropriate for you in which situations, and how to understand that in your own body. So really kind of diving into all that. So that's largely what I'm kind of doing for work. I'm sort of I think I'm a perpetual student. I just have this curiosity and I just want to know things. So I'm studying all sorts of other things at the moment as well. So I'm not quite sure what that's all going to look like, but I'm really excited to learn more about all of this. And it just feels like the best thing I've ever done, this work. I'm working with Vicky, who I met through the podcast. She's also a breathing instructor. She also has experience of long COVID. She's doing much, much, much better, but she's not quite recovered as of this moment. And it's really nice working with somebody who, we get each other. There was one time recently where we sent ourselves the same research paper at the same time. So I saw it and emailed her, and she saw it and emailed me, like, at almost exactly the same time, and we just really click. So it's really nice having someone like that to work with. And then, yeah, beyond work, because let's face it, we don't want to fill all our lives with work, and that's what I did before. I'm starting to learn to balance my life, and yes, I want to work, and that's important to me, but having that freedom to do what I want, outside of that. So yeah, we bought a camper van earlier this year, and we've just been away in it a lot, adventures and getting back out on the hills. I was saying just before we hit record that I woke up yesterday morning. We got back very late on Sunday night after a really, really big hike, and my legs were so sore on Monday morning. I got out of bed and it was like, oh my goodness, walking down the stairs is going to be a real challenge this morning. And it was the best feeling ever, because it was like, it's so wonderful to feel this sore and for that to be okay.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, yeah, to be able to push myself that much, but also then kind of go, okay, well, I really pushed myself really hard, and understanding that the body needs balance. So yesterday I took it really chill. Whereas, before I would have done that at the weekend, and then it would have been up at 6 on Monday morning, off to work. I'd have, smashed out 40 miles on the bike in the evening, rinse and repeat kind of thing. So it's kind of really understanding, respecting my body better. I'm not indestructible, although actually I probably am much more resilient now than I was before. So yeah, life is really great. I feel much more grateful for everything, and I hope that doesn't change. I don't want to get into that kind of thing where I take things for granted anymore, because I know what it's like when you can't. You know,
Yeah.
you have all of that stripped away from you, and it's devastating. So, you know, I'm so grateful. I'm so happy to have all of that back. And yeah, I suppose I have a better understanding and certainly a better respect for health now than I did before, and that actually health is the most valuable thing we have. And, you know, that we should, you know, respect that in ourselves, I think. Because in the end of the day, when we get to 90 years old, we want to be looking back going, oh yeah, that was great, rather than I wish I had, you know, whatever.
Hmm.
So yeah.
That is a very nice message to leave on. I think there's that brilliant quote, isn't there, where it's a healthy man wants 1,000 things, a sick man only wants one, and I think that's very relatable
Exactly.
to many people with long COVID. But Jackie, thank you
Absolutely.
so much for coming on, and thank you so much for all the work that you do. It's yeah, it's really very much appreciated. Any links that you have, I'll put them in the description. And yeah, I look forward to staying in touch and hearing more about your camping trips. And yeah, all the very best for the future.
Thank you so much.